30 years ago, here in the land of Israel, there was about 600 local believers. Now, today, there's over 20,000. So there's been much growth and development. And my guest today has grown up and seen and witnessed so many of these changes. And you're going to hear more about them today. Hi, my name is Cody Archer, and I'm so glad that you're joining me today for Revive Live. Thanks for joining this conversation. And before I introduce you to my guest, many of you have different events, conferences that are happening around the world, and you may be interested in inviting one of our team members to come and speak and teach in one of these events. And so I want to direct you to our website, reviveisrael.org. On our contact page, you can find a place where you can invite and share details about your event. And it might work out that one of our leaders would be able to be sent to you to bless you, your congregation, the conference that you are hosting. So I want to make that known to you. And now I want to introduce my guest, Mati Shoshani. Mati, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
You're a friend of mine. We've had the opportunity to serve as deacons in a congregation. Now you're back with your dad in his congregation. You're a pastor's son. You're a father of 3 children. You live here in Yad HaShmona, and you're Jewish from both sides. You're a hardworking man. You love the Lord. You're an excellent Bible teacher, and I'm just glad that you've given me some time to chat with you today.
I think you're overselling me, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, hey, you're a great guy, and I want our friends around the world to get to know you, some of your story, because I believe you have a unique insight that actually very few people can give. And I kind of introduced it already, that you, as a second-generation believer, you're a pastor's son, and you grew up here in this land, speaking Hebrew, serving in the army, and even you knew my wife growing up. You and her family did things. You guys went to the Kinneret, to the Sea of Galilee. You were in youth camps together. So I want to hear some of these stories, and I believe it's going to give insight into what God has really been doing over these last 3 decades. But let's start with, where were you born? What were some of the first years of your life like here in Israel?
I'll just comment them. I'm not actually a pastor. Now I'm a pastor's son, or the son of a pastor, but I didn't grow up being a pastor's son, which is a big difference.
That's true.
My father's an engineer, and I grew up till my early 20s. He was in construction work and had nothing to do with official ministry, although he always served.
Yes.
So for me, that was a different experience. Yeah, so I was born in Haifa, but had grown and raised in the Jerusalem area, inside the city, outside of the city. And then we moved back as a married couple into the city, now out back again. I live right behind this picture here. And yeah, I've had the privilege and, just of being here my entire life and growing up in the body of Messiah as it's morphed and changed through the years.
Yeah,
for sure.
So did you ever have a season in your life where you were really questioning your faith? Or?
No, I left the faith.
Okay, so tell us about that.
Yeah, I left the faith for almost 5 years. And I would say it's special, but it's honestly not many. It's not simple being a believer in Israel because it's different than the rest of society. So if you don't really want to fight for it, there's no reason to just stay. I mean, if you live in a Christian country, you can just pretend, play along for a couple of years, but in Israel,
there's more acceptable. Also,
yeah, in Israel, there's no point in doing that if you're not part of the community. Why would you struggle and set yourself apart from society? Yeah. So most of my military service, which was 5 years, a little over 5 years, most of my military service, I completely left the faith, and it's not that I didn't believe. I was honestly just being rebellious, and came back with the help of your wife, in a way. And others at Revive Israel too, came back to faith in a very strong way as I came out of the army, and then in the 1.5 or 2 years after that.
Wow.
But there's a phase, just to comment on the culture, you really have to make your own choice. I mean, Israel isn't a Messianic Jewish or even a society that is favorable in general towards belief in Yeshua and in Christ.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of come to have a coming into age and a mature approach to it that is yours. You have to take ownership as a person, and for many people that involves sort of stepping out of it to be able to step back into it.
Yeah. So then that time after your service in the army, you just got to a place of emptiness, brokenness.
No,
the grass wasn't greener on the other side.
During my military service.
Okay.
Part of the reason I left the army had to do with wanting to get back to faith, and I had developed, it's a long story, but developed negative personality traits and destructive behavior patterns, and it became very clear to me that I was in a bad place. I wasn't like depressed or anything like that, but I wasn't happy with the way my life was going, and I wanted to change it.
Yeah. Wow. So then at what point did Revive Israel come into the picture for you?
Liat, your wife, was step one to Revive. Again, like you said, we had like a childhood friendship, going back to, I mean, actual like early childhood.
Yeah.
With her and her family. She was one of the people, but she was very influential in pulling me back into like congregating with other believers, and that was part of it. And before Revive, or it's honestly connected to Revive, I started attending Ahavat Yeshua even as I was coming out of the army.
Okay.
I'm not 100% clear on what month it was, but it was a couple months before I got out of the army. Every once in a while I'd come and attend the congregation, back when it was like 40 young adults.
Right in the first year or two.
When we were like in our early 20s, now we're in our mid 30s, so it's been a while. So yeah, I mean, it was maybe 2 or 3 months after they first met, and up in the Klal building and stuff like that. And then I left. I didn't join Revive actually for almost a year after that. And then I had another job, and then I left that job to come and do a discipleship program with Revive.
Yes.
Where I don't know who I can name on air. Multiple individuals who were connected and are and some who are not anymore connected to Revive.
Yeah. Wow. And so you had a season here of some discipleship training, some leadership.
Yeah, it was I don't know how it is today. It was relatively unofficial at the time. It was more, you come, organic, you do, we talk.
Yeah.
Take as much as you can, and I did, and it was good. And
yes. And you got sent on to the next season of your life.
No, and I stayed here for several years.
Yes.
And then moved on to several seasons of our life.
Yes.
Yeah. Apparently, I heard this on a podcast the other day. This whole idea of you have one career is no longer relevant. And I looked back in my life, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like you can't really. I do a job now that I'm not sure will be relevant in 10 years.
Yeah.
As in, I'm not sure that the technology will even require human involvement at that point. So,
that's true.
So you don't know.
Even for me too.
Yeah, you really don't know.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. Now I want to hear from you a little bit more. Growing up here, you went to some youth camps, I'm sure. Growing up in a congregation, you're in the believing bubble, let's call it. What have you seen in the growth, the development of the body of Messiah from 20 years ago to today?
Well, we've grown a lot. I mean, I think the number game has changed dramatically, and it might not mean a lot to people outside, but when you're a tiny minority, I mean, and this is just my personal experience. Some people in my age group have had different experiences.
Yeah.
But for most of my life, I was the only believer. Period.
In your school or everywhere?
Everywhere.
Yeah. Wow.
Not like in school. When I played music, I was the only guy in the orchestra that was, when I went to whatever, child activities, I was everywhere you went, including in the army, with the exception of a 4-month period where one of my soldiers was a Messianic Jew. We're talking into my mid-20s, you're always, it's not alone, but you're
that's not easy.
One of the only guys who has the faith. And things have changed dramatically. I'm the eldest of 7 kids, and some of my younger siblings, and it's not just their story, it's the story of the community that grew from, this handful of hundreds of locals to many thousands of locals. It just changed the way people experience life.
Yeah.
Because suddenly you're not the only one in your school, sometimes not even in your class. So people, one of my younger sisters had a prayer group in her school, and because there were enough believers to have one, so it's a lot of things change, and also the way Israeli society talks about Messianic Jews has changed dramatically for 2 main reasons. One, it's because of information, so they've been exposed to information just any information about it. If you said it 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you said I'm a Messianic Jew, most people just have a puzzled look and they'd...
Never heard of that before.
What does that mean? Are you like Chabad? Where's your... nothing clicked.
Yes.
And now the most people you'll meet have that basic information. They've watched a news article, they've read somewhere in the newspaper, negative or positive, but they've had some exposure to what we are as a group.
Yes.
And then the second element is personal encounter, where many people, I don't want to say most, many people in Israeli society today have brushed into other Messianic Jews or evangelical Christians, but in a positive way.
Yes.
And so many times, you're not the first point of contact. They'll be like, oh, I know X, and I went to the army with him, and I did this, and there'll be something that was that happened before, and 20 years ago that was not at all the case, and today that's across the board usually the case.
That's really good.
It's been a huge change.
That's awesome.
And I'll just comment one more thing, that it's also, people have also changed in the way they speak about it. They'll repeat messaging that they've heard that's been spoken by the Messianic community in the past. And I'll give an example. This past worked for me, but also there are many people who are involved in this. people will just repeat. They'll say, we're Jews. We never stopped being a Jew. I believe in Christ. I believe in Yeshua. You know, I serve in the army. I'm an Israeli like you, and I'm Jewish like you.
Yeah.
And what sets us apart is I think this is the Messiah, and you probably haven't thought about who the Messiah is. You know, that's
Yes.
And so now things are very different, and people will often repeat that almost to like in a humorous way. Say, oh, I've heard about Messianic Jews. You're still Jewish. You pay your taxes. You serve in the army. And I met a guy, and it's like they almost repeat what we've been saying.
Yes.
So it's had a huge effect on society.
Wow. So I'm not asking you to be a prophet right now, but what do you see coming in the next decade, let's say, in the body of Messiah here in Israel?
Yeah, I've been misquoting the Bible. In Judaism, you say prophecy is given to the fools, but it's not actually biblical. It's from the Talmud. And I recently looked it up because I couldn't find it in the Bible and realized I was misquoting it. But prophecy is given, I don't want to say to the fools, but you need to be very careful with what you say.
Yeah.
And I can only look at the Bible. The Bible says many things, some of them very clearly. Clearly, many more people are going to come to faith in Israel.
Yeah.
Clearly, a lot of bad stuff, you know, to be very broad,
Yes.
is going to happen in Israel and in the region, and a lot of it already is, and has been in the past. So I wouldn't be specific about the politics of it. I'd be specific about the spiritual revival, and I think if you look back to the history, we're there.
Yeah.
I mean, it took all these compounding, you know, the restoration of Israel as a nation and a language and the people and the Aliyah and all these things to get to the point where Jews can finally be in the land and even be open. I mean, just have the conversation of, is this our Messiah or not?
Yeah.
So it's taken a lot of history to get to here.
Yeah.
Now we can like look to the next to the next phase.
Wow.
And if you just like look at the mathematics of it, it's been moving in a very positive direction. But what we've seen, I don't know if this has been talked about in the show. I'm very much into the history of revival and things like that. It never happens in a linear way. It's always exponential. In other words, it's always, it'll be a core and then it explodes, and then that core, it you know, grows very rapidly. And it's never just a gradual growth. And we've been seeing a lot of gradual growth in Israel. So clearly, if you follow the historical pattern, something substantial needs to happen. Because it did happen, and we didn't mention this, in the late 70s and early 80s, the sort of like the tidal wave of the Summer of Love and this, you know, the Jesus movement in the U.S. arrived on the shores of Israel. It's a long story, through many different people and many different organizations. And there was, for the first time in history, there were hundreds of Israelis who were saved. And that didn't exist before. Before 1977, 1978, there were I mean, you could literally count them on probably, you know, 2 people on their hands, maybe 20, 30 people. And then it exploded at that time and then grew from there in a linear way. So if I would have to guess or follow the Bible's lead, it would say the next time is going to be something
even bigger.
You know, bigger.
Wow,
and if you look through history, it's always something that's, you know, something usually negative, honestly, happens in society. So society needs to be beat down, or the national ethos or narrative has to be questioned or challenged. So for America, it was, you know, the hippie movement. For Israel, it was the Yom Kippur War, and this is a lot of stuff. Yom Kippur War and all the waves of immigration that were, for the first time, first generation Israelis who could actually challenge their faith and tradition because they weren't living in the diaspora under, you know, as a minority under a different nation. So it takes something substantial to happen. You know? I don't know what it is, but
I don't either, but I feel like we're getting closer to something like that. Well, tell me now, what are you doing today?
So I run a production company, video, live events, stuff like that.
Okay, so if some of our friends around the world were to come here to Israel and were looking for someone to film some of their tour, or...
Then they can look us up.
Okay, how could they do that?
The company is called Sarel Media, Sarel, Media and Production. And if you Google it or Facebook it or Instagram it, you'll find us. You'll find us there.
Okay.
So we do that. I run operations for also TBN in Israel, Trinity Broadcast.
What does that look like? What does that include?
It's basically creating content for the Christian world related to what happens in Israel, and also in the last like year or two, things that are happening in the region. Just trying to communicate those stories outwardly. Give people in the West an idea of what God is doing and man is doing, honestly, in you know, in this region.
That's really good. So in some ways, you and I have a similar
probably
job description.
Communicating is a very important role.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and also managing media and also interviewing people. You've had some opportunities to
I've
interview.
done a lot of that, yeah.
Some really big name believers from the nations, and that's awesome. Now, if people want to go and find out some more of some of this stuff on TBN, do you guys have a Facebook page,
so we have
website?
There's a website called, TBN has a website, and a lot of the content made in Israel is on that website, but not all of it, because some of it is, I won't go into the distribution of it. So it's tbn.org.
Okay.
We'll have some of it. You can look up Israel content. And then there's a website called TBN Israel that you can find. You can just Google it. And on Facebook and on Instagram. And in there you can find a lot of the content. It's broken down into playlists and on YouTube actually too.
Okay. Really good. Well,
and there's a lot of stories there that are like, that will help people understand what's really happening in the country. Because talking stats and talking history, it's always like big picture, but you really only connect with a story when you have a face and a name and a voice to connect to it.
Yeah.
So that's what we focus on.
Yeah.
Is say, okay, you say Israel, okay, you say here's high tech, you say Christianity, you say Messianic Judaism, you say faith, whatever it is, if you put a face and that face has a voice and a story, it's sort of, it encapsulates everything for the viewer.
Yeah, it's really
because
good.
you really, it's like, oh, I know someone who's that element in that story.
It's really good. And also one of the things that I've noticed what you've been doing recently is giving a voice to Christians that even come and serve in some of the monasteries. You know, one of the things we're giving is a face or opening the door into Messianic Judaism, believers in Yeshua, Jewish people, and a little bit on the Arab Christian side. But you're giving a side also as well that we won't touch on at all probably here at Revive Israel. So I think that's interesting.
in like the scope of history, the voice and the sort of the guardians of the faith in the land for over 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true. Not 2,000 years, but let's say 1,500 years or 1,800 years in certain places. It's been the monastic movement, and then later on Arab Christians.
Yeah.
And then so I've been to Jordan 3 times this past 9 months on production, and we've been in other places around the Middle East. And truly, it's changed in the last 10 years, but aside from that small sliver of history, everything that preceded that was, the monastic movement, was Orthodox churches, Catholic churches, and those were the people who held the faith.
Yeah.
And even in Israel,
yeah.
Most of the places under, centuries or millennia of Islam, the people who held the Christian sites were, the Franciscans, for instance, or some of the other movements.
So true.
So I think it's a very important story.
Yeah.
And it's also always, not always, but many times, it's very touching and very heartwarming to meet the people on the other side.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those people are, they're people of faith.
Yeah.
And they're people that believe in the promise of the Bible. They're people that have devoted their life to serving in what they think is, is the best way to serve God's will.
Yeah.
And for some of them, it's maintaining a building. For others, it's, encountering or interacting with people. But it's very important. And when you look at history, Messianic Judaism is a speck.
Yeah.
Evangelical Christianity is a slightly bigger speck.
Yes.
And there's a whole lot that happened before that's of a lot of substance.
So true. Yeah, it's really good. Well, we're almost out of time. I just want to take a second and just invite you guys to like and share this broadcast. I know that you have someone in some of your followers, family, friends that would enjoy taking part in this conversation with us today. Also, we'd love to hear where you're watching from. We love seeing every week those of you from the Philippines and Singapore and America and Canada and South Africa, all over the world. We love having you a part of our conversations. And Mati, as we just finished our time, I want to ask you one more thing. What do you want our friends around the world to know about Israel that you know that they may not know?
That's a tough question. I think the big thing is connecting all the dots. And connecting all the dots, if they're already watching a Revive Live, so they probably have an inclination towards Israel and God's plan.
Yeah.
But in connecting all those dots, the spiritual, the historical, the people, it really gives you a picture of what God is doing in this land. And the reason that's important, aside from the fact that it's, the people of the Bible in the land of the Bible fulfilling God's promise, there's more to it where a lot of God's plans are coming into place in this land. So you can extract and understand, not just Israel, also our surrounding countries. I think it's really important for believers to understand what's happening because the Bible's not a dead book. It's a live book, and a lot of it has yet to be, it's written, but it has yet to have happened.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important for people to tune into what is happening here. The body of Messiah in Israel is spoken of in very specific words in both the Old and the New Testament.
Yeah.
So you need to be tuned into that. The political and geopolitical events happening here are relevant today and 10 years ago and 10 years from now. So I think it's very important for people to spend time sort of taking in what's happening here. Revival Live is one way, but you should read up. Read up in both in the Bible and also in newspapers and articles, and just get a grasp of what's happening here, because they say people that come to Israel, the Bible comes alive to them. It's because the Bible is no longer just a book.
Yes.
It's a story that has a beginning and a present and a future that you can sort of see in the living people in the land.
Wow.
So, yeah. I don't want to say pray. I said, no, go and get some information.
Yeah, really good. Great word. Thank you, Matti, for your time today.
Thank you
Great
for
having
having
a
me.
chat with you.
Yeah.
And guys, thanks again to you for joining us for this conversation on Revive Live. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.